So I will show you two slides to introduce this morning and to show you what's going on, and then I am very honored to give the word to the guests of today. So I share my presentation now. So welcome everybody on this online mission to India, and it's the fifth online mission we do together with the Netherlands Enterprise Agency. We flew already uh, to all parts of the world, from New York, Brussels, China, and South Korea, and today we're flying to India. And I will immediately stop this presentation as well because the introduction of today will be done by a Deputy Mayor of the City of The Hague, Saskia Bruines. And after that, I'm very pleased to give the floor to Mr. Kunal Kumar, who is the director, the mission director of Smart Cities, the Smart Cities mission of the Government of India. So he is the man who does the smart city strategy of India. And after that, Guus Derks, who is Smart Cities Director at the Netherlands Enterprise Agency, will will ask the first question to Mr. Kumar. Then there are questions and discussion. Then it's time to say goodbye. And before I give the word to Mrs. Bruines, I will show you some slides and will give you some introduction of what's going on today and what's the context of this presentation. So my name is Willem Westelink. I'm the program manager of the Future City Foundation, and together with the RVO, we will do these missions. Um, um, and um, if you want to introduce yourself as well, you can put your name and your LinkedIn address in the chat box. If you want to connect with me, you can use this QR code and I will share my LinkedIn address as well. So how do we do this? When the line is the mute master of today, and during the presentation, she will mute you if you make annoying background noise. So please set your microphone on mute. During the lecture, there's an opportunity to ask questions. You can do that in the chat box, so it will be an interactive online event. If you have any questions during the short speeches, you can ask them in the chat box, as I mentioned, and if you want to ask, if you get the microphone on, please don't talk. Please don't talk when other people talk. So everything can go wrong, of course. If you don't hear anything, there's something wrong with your computer audio. If you can't see all participants in one screen, you use the button in the top of your browser. So there you can share the screen from. There are options to share to see what you want to see. Sorry for my English today. And if others don't hear or see you, there's something wrong with your microphone or video. So I'm from the Future City Foundation, and Future City is a movement of communities. These are our partners. We're connected to the Fireware Foundation, the Fire iHub. And what we do is we combine public and private people and we call that partner science. And we try to bridge the gap between smart and city. And the question we're facing is how are cities, villages, and regions changing? And we focus on the how question. That we focus on how do we do that regarding to public administration, regarding to politics, regarding to urban planning, and regarding to technique, and therefore, of course, we're very proud fiber partner. And regarding to the urban planning part, to the urban planning questions, we're very proud to be to be part of the city deal. A slimme stad, zo doe je dat. A smart city, this is how you do it. In which 40 partners, more than 40 partners, think about what kind of tooling we need to really build smart cities. And in that mission, in that city deal, which is a program from the Ministry of the Interior, in which many innovative questions are asked. In that mission, we try to learn from what's going on around the world, and today we want to learn from what's going on in India. And by saying that, I will stop sharing my screen and give the mic, so to say, to Saskia Bruines.
Good morning, everyone. Yes, there I am. Good morning, everyone. Thank you for hosting this webinar. I'm happy to open this event, and I think especially in times like this, with the Corona crisis and all, it is good to have discussions like this, not on the way we normally used to, but in a digital way. I think it's good, and to talk about digitalization and also about opportunities of cooperation. My name is Saskia Bruines. I'm a deputy mayor of the city of The Hague for economic affairs, international affairs, and municipal services. And my portfolio includes smart city and innovation as well. For the international audience, I will give a brief introduction of the city of The Hague. The third city in the Netherlands with more than 500,000 inhabitants. It's very small, comparable to India, I must say, but the third city in the Netherlands, and more than 1 million if we include the neighboring municipalities. The Hague is the home of our national government and our parliament. On an international level, The Hague is known as the city of peace and justice, and has evolved into the third United Nations city in the world. Very proud of that. And last but not least, The Hague is a city near the sea, with a fishing port and also 11 kilometers of beach. But in these days, it's very nice for people to get out, if it's possible to go out, to stay at the beach. But we're talking about digital transformation, and of course we all know it is affecting our society, the social life, and the way of living of all our citizens. And during the Corona crisis, we depend more than ever on the internet and the digital apps to connect and to interact on a distance. All people from City Hall and all companies people are working at home, as we see here also. But in addition, technology will provide opportunities to restart the economy and coming out the lockdown in a responsible way, without coercion and based on privacy principles. The Hague has a progressive agenda for digitalization and also for innovation. Everyone must be in a position to benefit from digital society, which will require also new skills. And to that end, lifelong learning is the new motto. As a city, we want to utilize new technology and data to face urban challenges like mobility, and security, and livability. And to do so in a controlled manner, we will shortly open, as we call it, Living Lab near Scheveningen, that's Scheveningen Beach, to develop new digital tools for the area. Just to name some of them, innovations such as a beach cleaning robot, tools for insect identification, and the creation of a smart energy grid. Important to us always is innovation must serve public benefit and with respect for everyone's privacy. And there are a lot of digital possibilities to explore and develop with the help of local residents. We become increasingly independent on digital tools, and we pressure on the digital resilience of our city. And this pressure is likewise increasing. Our national security cluster, the Hague Security Delta, businesses, governments, and knowledge institutions work together on innovations and knowledge in the field of cybersecurity. And as an international city focusing on innovation and cybersecurity, we do a lot of connections with India and has a lot of opportunities also for us. There's a strong cultural relationship also because The Hague has the largest Indian diaspora in Europe. And we're working together with Karnataka and Bangalore. The scope of the MOU we have with Karnataka focused on elderly care, startups, genetics, and technology. And this agreement has resulted in knowledge sharing, exchange of startups, and the organization of joint hackathons and events. And the next level of cooperation is by actively connecting knowledge institutions and hubs for startups and scale-ups to the similar counterparts in India. So the majority of Indian companies in The Hague, we have a lot of them also here, are active in the field of emerging technologies like AI and blockchain and cybersecurity. It suits the profile of The Hague and our smart city agenda. So we're very proud of this cooperation. I think that's but that's I want to tell you in short about connection between The Hague and India in the field of smart city and technical innovations. Thank you. I wish you a very good meeting. I must say I have to leave halfway because I have another meeting. So when I'm not there anymore, about 9:30. Thank you.
Thanks so much for this introduction. One short question: what are you looking for to learn from the presentation from Mr. Kumar?
Well, I think Mr. Kumar has a big ambitious program on using smart technology and for a lot of cities, and we also want to learn from each other. We do this in the Holland with cooperation between different cities on smart innovations. And I think it's very good and interesting to see how things work in other countries and how we can learn from each other or maybe connect.
Thank you so much, and thank you so much for this introduction. And by saying that, I'm very proud to give the floor to Mr. Kunal Kumar, who will lead us on this mission through India. It's up to you.
Thank you so much, Jan. Thank you so much, Ms. Saskia. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening to all my friends across the world. It's about 12:45, 12:50 here in India, noon. And I would try to keep it brief so that we can have more interactions. So welcome to India. It's like the airport and I'm receiving you all. This is an online mission, but it's an online airport. So I'm glad to host you today. I think it's a very smart thing that you as a team are doing in Netherlands to be connected with various parts of the world and try to learn of opportunities. And that speaks volumes about the importance of human connectedness, especially in these times of crisis, and how we can learn from each other, even though we are hit with something as of the magnitude that we are at the moment. I would be, so let me start from giving you a background about how India has evolved. You all know that all countries are at different points of in their history, and post-independence in 1947, it's about 70 years now, and we've seen different important milestones in India's governance. And if you see, the most important milestone as far as city governance is concerned happened in 1992, when the constitution actually recognized cities as a third tier of government. Till that time, it was very centralized, the government of India and the state governments. And the third tier was introduced in 92. Whether it has actually evolved to become city government, or is just a midway between being a city government and some powers which have been devolved from the states, is a question which will be answered in different ways for different parts of the country at the moment. We're still evolving. And the kind of focus that India needed to give to its urban areas was clearly not there till about 2000 and early 2000s. But then, and a lot of research around, agglomeration economics and how cities do contribute towards not only the economy, but about various other aspects of a country's life started to dawn on us in the earlier part of the 2000s. And then from then on, in the last 15 or 17 years, we've seen a lot of focus on urban in the country. It was in 2014 when this government's first term had begun that they started talking about smart cities. And till that time, it was more of investment in infrastructure, and we were almost trying to catch up with what was needed yesterday. So whether it is sanitation systems, roads, or you need water systems, all of that which was needed way before should have been catered to was what we're trying to catch up with. And here was an ambitious government which came and said, look, all that will keep happening, but we can't stop looking at what we can do going forward. It's not only about, infrastructure and services, it's about also a lot of different things and new challenges that our cities have started to face. And on that foundation, the smart cities mission of the country was announced in 2015. And from then on, it's been about 5 years. It's a government program in a way because the government announced it. But there are multiple dimensions to it. I'll touch upon them going forward. And as is a government program, there's a budget around it. So I'll just touch upon those numbers. It's a $30 billion program where a lot of investment is coming from multiple different sources. 45% of the investment is coming from the government, both the state and the central governments. And the other investment is coming from private players, public-private partnerships, loans, bonds, and value capture finance, tax financing, and many different ways of financing the infrastructure and services that the smart cities are trying to put in place. Now, the big question which everyone asks is, what is the definition? What is the template? How does India go about defining what smartness means to it in its cities? And the best definition, which actually has clicked with a larger section of the population, is cities which are built for their people, are smart cities. And it's not about technology, it's not about infrastructure. And if you talk to people on ground in India, they will say cities built around people are smart cities. But if I talk to, I have been traveling to the Netherlands, I've been traveling to Germany, I've been traveling to a lot of other countries in Europe. The general definition that I hear when I talk to a common man, I say, what is a smart city? The definition that comes in is a smart city is a city which uses technology to make our lives better. But in India, if you ask people, they will say smart city is a city which makes our lives better, not necessarily using technology or otherwise. And I think at the foundation of all this is people. So we then have to look at, and people is very diverse. It's a very heterogeneous society. So then it becomes even more complex when you try to start to define your smart city vision. And sometimes foundational principles, like for example, for us, inclusion is a foundational principle. Innovation is a foundational principle. Sustainability is a foundational principle. Community-driven approach is a foundational principle. And sometimes you can see even contradiction among these approaches. For example, theoretically, if you are community-driven and also inclusive, there could be a situation where 95% of the community speaks against a 5% community, where if you go by the logic of being community-driven, you should accept that logic because a larger section of the community is speaking for something. And this does happen in migration and other places. You can link to this story in Europe, in that ways. But your other fundamental principle is inclusion, and you have also to take care of the 5% of the population. So those are kinds of complex situations which we do encounter time and again, being a diverse country. So people at the center, sustainability, innovation, inclusion, and citizen-centric or community-centric approach being foundational principles. Cities are working on multiple different project areas. And if I broadly define blocks into which these projects will fall, they would relate to how to improve governance. One is how to improve governance. The second is how do you bring in new sources of finance, and how do you finance your cities. Third is about this whole big area of urban planning, and how do you make planning more citizen-centric, more dynamic, more evolving, agile, resilient, and adaptive going forward. The fourth bit is about services and infrastructure, where, yes, and there I see a big difference between how Europe and we look at smart cities. Because it's not only the digital layer at top, it's sometimes, all the different layers. When you're putting a water system in place, you're putting in, surveillance systems in place, you're putting digital layers in place, you're putting customer layers in place, and you so many different layers of work within smart cities. And the fifth is, of course, the use of technology. And as Ms. Saskia was talking about, technology has to be non-coercive, it has to be inclusive, it has to take care of privacy. So all those contradictions again, sometimes there's no one answer to these questions. You take your communities along, even your act. By the way, India is on the verge of coming out with its own privacy law, which is almost on the same lines as some of the laws in the Europe. And so, but there are flexibilities built in, and each community does want to use that flexibility in different ways. And so we don't have a one size fits all for everyone. Broad tenets are described. And when you talk to people on ground, they actually talk about technology as if you're riding a tiger. And that's the sense you get. So you see a lot of cameras, you see a lot of SCADA systems, you see a lot of surveillance, you see a lot of control systems, but you also think, well, what's happening to my data? What happens if the city is taken over and one fine day all the street lights are shut down? So all those things, and you never will be on top of this game. We realize that the best of cybersecurity experts are always in a flux. They say, well, you've reached cybersecurity of this level, nuisance creators will be always one step forward. So there's always a cat and mouse game going on. And so that's the whole area. So these are 5 things: governance, finance, planning, technology, services, and infrastructure. And now you see who delivers these 5 areas of work. And again, it's a combination of what we call the quadruple helix. It's government. A lot of things will actually happen through the community. It will also happen through academic institutions. For example, you were mentioning about the living lab in the Hague. In fact, I'm sure the local university will be a part of it. The local industry will be a part of it. Startups will be a part of it. So it's a quadruple helix between the industry, community, academia, and the city, and all them coming together and trying to evolve these solutions. And when you see this foundation, each city will have its own different, uh, bunch of projects. So you wouldn't say that India as a whole is looking for mobility as smart city. That is mere aggregation of all that you see on ground. And aggregations can happen, can change because city priorities can change and the flexibility is there. So today you are prioritizing something else. Tomorrow you're hit by this coronavirus and you think health should have been a priority. You are flexible. You have the flexibility to reprioritize your projects. So we aggregate at the central level. We don't really templatize that your city should be doing X or Y. You see broadly the areas, and I'll come to the point that you're trying to make about which city, which kind of projects our Dutch companies should be focusing on, and generally companies should be focusing on. Broadly, they are mobility, their water, the sanitation, the waste management, housing, and safety, security, environment, climate. So these are the broad areas where most people are focused. And you saw I didn't mention education and health, because when we started the mission, a lot of people were not talking about education and health, but now, over the last 4 months, you see the kind of switch in everybody's tactics, and everybody is trying to maneuver their projects towards education and health, because education, of course, going online for a lot of the municipal schools which actually cater to low-income households, a lot of issues about how education is reaching those children and how we can use smart technologies around education. Of course, in health, it's both about access to health, it's also about quality of health, it's also about health infrastructure. So 3 real areas of work. When I say access to health, how can we bring access to health to home, to telemedicine systems, right? To better ways of actually linking people to how to reach hospitals, how to get access to hospitals, and also better ways of actually giving them good quality treatment, and also upgrading our health infrastructure to meet the kind of crisis situations that you often go through. If you see here, another foundational element to all this is the work that we're trying to do around data. And you mentioned Fiverr, and we actually, in partnership with Fiverr, we work very closely with Fiverr because we are creating the urban data exchange architecture for our country, and Fiverr is working closely with an institution which we call the Indian Institute of Science. So the IISC is based out of Bangalore, and Bangalore IISC is actually working closely with the Fiverr Foundation to evolve our urban data exchange protocols. And of course, all cities on open data, cities trying to create data alliances. I was witness to the kind of public-private partnership you had in Amsterdam around data. I think the development board or something, I'm forgetting the name, in Amsterdam, where a lot of public-private players, and you have that Amsterdam arena where you have a living lab kind of a situation. So we're also working with the people in Amsterdam arena, set up one such unit in a place called Hyderabad already, and we're scaling it up to other cities. So a lot of work. I'm just touching, this is a tip of the iceberg kind of a, just introduction on the kind of work we're trying to do on data and technology. Essentially 3 broad pillars. in which the work in data and technology goes into, which is people, processes, and platforms. So most of the things that we talk about in technology is largely about technology itself. But I, I have seen that if you remove the people element of technology from the discussion, technology really doesn't give you any kind of output, specifically in a situation like ours. So how do we actually work on the people aspect? How do we create awareness around technology and data? How do we build capacity in the institutions of having things like city data officers, data champions, coordinators, people who can make alliances around data, who can create these use cases, work with private sectors, almost act as data brokers, figure out where the needs for data are and actually bridge those gaps and bring out the data in the open, of course, in the purview of the law. And then processes. Cities having their own data policies, cities having their own, organizational approaches towards how they handle data, how they handle, kind of situations which come out because of the evolving law and all that stuff. So how they link to the broader ecosystem, and of course the platforms, which is the urban data exchange, the open data platforms, and the various. So what we call is the national urban innovation stack, and so there are a lot of foundational elements that each city uses. So we put a team in place at the national level which builds stack elements, which are like Lego blocks. India has done a fair bit of work in using technology in the way we use Lego blocks. Aadhaar, the India's identity mechanism, which is like each of us have a 12-digit number, which is the Aadhaar number, which is basically it's an identity. It's not a citizenship number. It's an identity number. And so with your identity number, with your phone number, with your digital signature, and so many different kinds of stack elements, these can go into any different kind of solution that you're creating. So these are the stack elements I talk about. These are the Lego blocks which can actually go into and create multiple different solutions going forward. It doesn't make sense if each city is trying to do its own bit, from scratch. So these are blocks which can be used by any city quickly. This is the approach we have when we say we have the national urban innovation stack, where we are trying to build these blocks. I'll also touch upon what we've done in Corona, and maybe I'll stop after that. So I think smart cities, we were evolving, and I wouldn't say that we've become smart. India's 100 smart cities have come through a process of competition. They're known as smart because they're wanting to become smart. I don't think any city in the world, ask any citizen in the world, and he or she will say that my city is smart. There are very few people who will be hugely optimistic and who will be really generous, who will say, yeah, my city is smart. If you ask anyone in New York as well, my city doesn't have this. If you ask someone in Amsterdam, my city doesn't have this. So it's always a journey. Smart cities is never a destination, and we'll never become smart. We will always be wanting to be smart, trying to be smart, doing things to make us smart. And I think that's the best and that's the smartest thing to do. The moment we say we already become smart, I think we're not smart. I think it's better to be in a zone of confusion, zone of learning, zone of experimentation, trying to figure out what the community needs and keep evolving, and that's smartness. So, and we've seen that in the Corona crisis. I think broadly, it's been a four-quadrant approach which we've seen in cities, and this is again a aggregation of what we've seen. We've not gone ahead and say, look, you have to have a four-quadrant. I think what they've done is in the four quadrants are information, communication, management, and preparedness or prediction or preparing for the future. So a whole lot of information management during the crisis has been done smartly by the smart cities, using technology or otherwise. Communication both ways with the citizens, with the community, do's and don'ts, a lot of rumors, getting them the right information, getting them the right dashboards, real-time information, trying to get all information from citizens, from the community, addressing their issues, both-way communication. Management, of course, was a huge exercise. It was like from essential services to lockdown management to health infrastructure management to crime management and everything. And the fourth is, of course, about preparedness. You use predictive models, you use data models to say where you will be at the end of June, July, August, and how's your health infrastructure shaping up, what will be the kind of disease load you will be expecting in the future. So these are the four quadrants in which smart cities have essentially, worked upon. And we've seen a lot of good effort which has happened. The World Economic Forum actually is trying to document a lot of our effort in smart cities, and very soon, I think, on their website, a lot of effort that India has put in will be done. We've undertaken an exercise with them. We've had conferences like these with cities in Colombia, cities in Israel, some cities in Europe, Dubai, some cities in the South Korea, Singapore, and we also keep constantly trying to learn from cities across the world. Of course, we have a strong community within the Indian ecosystem, so we have almost a weekly dialogue among cities and try to. And our role in the central government has largely been as a peer-to-peer facilitator, people uh, who get the platforms developed so unnecessarily duplications don't happen. We get the standards in place. We get the foundational context independent. So the two things, the context independent things and context dependent things. So we largely put the context independent things in place so that everyone can use them and their context can ride over that platform that we've created. So a lot of sharing and a lot of peer-to-peer learning is happening. Uh, so maybe I would stop here. There's so much more to say, but I would rather do it in an interactive way and not let it be monologue. So that's it from me, and maybe we can go towards discussions. And,
Thank you. Thank you so much for this presentation and for leading us to the smart city, to what's going on in India. And before we go to the questions, which are already mentioned, already written down in the chat, I will give the floor to Guus Derks, who will open up the Q&A.
Thank you very much, Jan Willem. Mr. Kumar, I'm very impressed by your presentation, and it has been a pleasure to listen at this. We have the same insights that technology is just a way to help to get the cities forward. But we are looking at, maybe organize a few follow-up webinars, and we would like to zoom in on some challenges combined with some areas. Do you have insight for us which challenges are relevant for which city or region, and then especially middle-tier cities?
So I would say the first big challenge would be the challenge of access. So when I say challenge of access, it's about access to good quality health, access to good quality education, access to good quality mobility, good quality housing. So I always encounter this example in our context is about the mobile phone. And so the world is talking about income inequality. And we all talk about the smart cities and cities in general increase income inequality. And there's some research which actually proves that is right. But the context in our case needs to move towards access inequality rather than income inequality. So even if I am poor and you are rich, we both have a mobile phone, so we can communicate using a device which is broken through this income inequality barrier. Can we break through that income inequality barrier as far as health, education, public transport, and things like that is concerned? That's one big area where our middle-tier cities are struggling. So it almost seems like an oxymoron, but the challenge is to get affordable excellence. Excellence which can be affordable. And to some people, it does sound like an oxymoron, impossibility to have both. But that's what, and I don't want to be very specific because, as I said, it's either going to be mobility in one city, more than education in another city, more than water in another city, but it's largely these domains, as I described earlier. So access is one. The second is about the big push on economic growth and jobs that our country needs to have, and therefore this big thought about what kind of technology. So it's almost what we call. There's a book which calls it Bridgital, which is bridge, analog, and digital. So let's say I'll just give an example of what kind of technology works. We have a lot of rural areas which are peripheral to our urban areas. And you would, of course, in small cities itself, you have problems of access. So imagine the access problem actually gets aggravated beyond the city areas. So can link workers or health workers who go to these cities use technology to actually communicate so quickly with the city, so the access barrier is reduced. So it's almost like a bridge technology, which does not replace the human. but augments the human with more powers and more support to be actually use the existing infrastructure to a greater extent. Then, of course, it's also about using technology for ease of living, which is livability. So, how do you monitor and how do you create reliability of public transport? How do you create, quality, improve the quality of public transport? Look, nobody in small cities, maybe they can't afford AC buses, but they can afford to have technology to get the buses on time. So even if they can't afford a bus every 10 minutes, but if the citizen knows that the bus can come every 30 minutes and it does come every 30 minutes, it's done because they can plan their lives accordingly. So those kinds of technologies. Uh, then, as I spoke about, it's a huge area of work which is not very expensive also, and I think it's very good for companies like yours is health and education, specifically online education, education for the masses. How we can actually, take that forward. Uh, Again, here, one of the challenges that our cities are facing is this hammers chasing nails problem. Because most vendors who come in say, yes, look, I have a solution, and where is the problem? And most of the debates actually start with those kinds of discussions, which is where just being a bit open, trying to find out what problems are, constructing the right problems, doing the right diagnosis, coming in with an open mind is very important for companies to actually chase the right problems and solving them. And of course, the heterogeneity itself, the problems of engaging with the community are immense in India because you don't have a one-track solution there. There's so many different kinds of people, and you have to deal with them at multiple levels. And I think sustainability is not only about climate. Sustainability is also about how involved your community is, how much of the social consciousness of the city along with you as far as project implementation, your smart city principles are concerned. So I don't know if I've answered your question. These are basically the areas where our cities do struggle. Of course, human resources is also a big challenge. We do have a constraint on people who can think on smart city principles. Most people actually are 9 or 10 people who come in start a conversation with, "Look, I have done this and I can do this for you," and that's where they can actually create a wrong impression about themselves because our cities are saying, "Look, come on, hear what the problem is, and try to contextualize your discussion on what we face instead of coming in with a solution and saying that, look, we've done here." So this glamour of best practices and things that have been done across the globe and come and do it in India, I think that's not going to happen. It has to be at least, if not better worded, a smart cut and paste, a copy paste rather than a but it definitely cannot be just pluck from here and implant it here. It's just not going to happen in that way. And a lot of learning is needed in the Indian context because it's a very heterogeneous thing. And so those are some points I wanted to make.
Thanks so much, Guus. Is that it is of course an answer to your question, but is it also the answer you were looking for?
Yeah, it is an answer, and I do fully agree with what Mr. Kumar is saying here that you cannot copy paste technologies or platforms from one region to another, but you have to address the challenges in every region and build that with building blocks. Can I ask one more question before we go to all the questions that I've seen come by in the chat? Or
of course you can.
So then I have one more question: is what are the main regions where you would say that have the most feeling and interest in setting up international partnerships on this topic?
Well, I would say generally most cities are, but if you want to ask me, cities in the west of the country and the south of the country are generally more proactive in doing this. This will be cities in the states of Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, Kerala, cities like in the state of Maharashtra, Gujarat, Madhya Pradesh. These would be the cities which would be more proactive than others. But as far as the need for partnerships goes, I think well, other cities are actually also, so it depends on what kind of challenge you actually want to take. So if it's a health challenge, it will be better in one kind of city, something But generally, if you want proactive cities, these would be the ones.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, and I'm heading over to the other questions which are mentioned in the chat. So I will we can do that together, Mr. Kumar. And there is a question from Anna Robin. How do you involve communities in decision regarding their environments and their intersection with technology? That's something you already mentioned, but please focus on it again.
One, on technology and climate, what we are trying to do in our cities is create what we call the climate alliances. So within the city, a group of organizations and individuals and communities who want to work on climate are coming together and forming these city alliances, which can look at local issues on climate. In order to help them with, looking at the right way of, the sort of the framework, we have what we call the climate smart cities framework. So it's a 5-pillar framework on climate smart cities, which is based on, one is water management, waste management, biodiversity management, mobility and air management, and management of green spaces and urban planning. So on these 5 pillars, each of these communities do benchmark themselves, and we do peer-to-peer benchmarking also, and we've already come out with one report of all benchmarking of these 100 cities. So in a way, try to support the community and understanding the gaps that they have. See, largely the data is going to be from the cities. It's just a framework, and it gives them the framework gives them convenience to compare within and inter and intra-city both. So that's the advantage that we've done. And we have separate groups within cities who look at different aspects. For example, unfortunately, in some of our cities, we still have slums and still have low-income housing in some areas. So there you have community-level organizations who will actually look into some of these issues, whereas the issues in some other areas could be different. Also, market-based approaches. Although, things like carbon tax are yet to pick up in our country. We have no examples of congestion pricing right now. It's tough in an environment, the political environment that we have. We're pushing for those things as part of our smart cities work. We're looking at innovative ways of raising finance locally for climate. This is one of the situations where our cities have got really hit hard on the normal sources of finance. The property taxes of the world, the sales taxes of the world, professional taxes, all have dried up because of the COVID crisis. So how do you get in finance for sustainable transport? How do you get finance for solar energy? How do you get finance for putting in climate sensitive infrastructure is something our cities are really trying to work upon. And it's a very, very difficult area of work because it's politically challenging.
But when you then look at because in your presentation you also mentioned the benefits but also the dangers of technology. Yeah, that I think that's one of the points you try to make. It's not only about technology; it's on using technology in the right way. How does technology help you during this crisis? So let's say if this COVID crisis was, let's say, 30 years ago, how much easier is it to challenge this and other crises today, to your opinion?
I think one of the things that this technology has done during this crisis has enabled us to connect people better. So at the end of the day, a pandemic becomes a crisis for the community, and sooner than later, everyone in the community, at least 60 to 70% people get the virus. I mean, that's how it progresses unless you have a vaccine which is given on a mass scale. For example, people who are in offices which are sub offices of a city corporation can continuously interact with people who are volunteers and people who have volunteered to be community drivers on a daily basis. So we see, a group of 200 people who represent the community. Let's say after every 50 or 60 households, you have one person who talks for those 50 households and engages with the government on those issues. Those are really interesting things. Resident welfare associations have been talking to us. That's one part of the thing. Uh, the second is this the information gathering. There's so many patients. Now, we have had close to 300,000 cases in the country. Let's say a city like Mumbai has already had 50,000 cases. So there are case records. There are, administrative records of when the ambulance came, what was the, medical diagnosis, all kinds of stuff, the testing and your X-rays and things like that. All of them is information that is actually being used to create insights, which was normally in the past.
Yeah, and do you think this also? It's hard. I realize it's very hard to say, but how many? But make it very concrete. How many lives are being saved because of this new technology? Just give us an impression or percentage or something. It's very hard to mention numbers. I understand that.
I think we're too early in the event to say that. I think most of the things that are happening now are very dynamic. But I would say would have been 50% as worse if we had not used the kind of stuff.
50% worse. 50% worse. That's what you're saying.
Yeah, in cities which have actually used technology, which are mostly our smart cities, have been really good at it. And I'll tell you, some cities are actually monitoring how much average time an ambulance takes to come to a patient, average time taken from the patient getting into the ambulance to getting into the hospital. They're tracking beds available in hospitals in real time so that the ambulance doesn't have to go around searching for beds. Patients are getting telemedicine facilities at home so that quickly they can be early detected and therefore they can get into the medical facilities soon. The community is connected. So, pulse oximeters, we never heard of these things in the past. Pulse oximeters are there in the community and everybody knows that an oxygen reading, saturation reading of less than 90% would actually, signal that something is wrong is going to happen. So the moment, I think the death rate is going to come down only because of early detection. Of course, you can't really, do about certain exceptional cases, but early detection is becoming really important with the use of technology is becoming, and of course, early hospitalization. So this entire chain is getting monitored. I wouldn't be able to put a number, but based on what I have been seeing on ground, I dare say that if these things would not have been there, there would have been many more. So 50% is the number that comes to my mind.
Okay, thank you so much. And 50%, that are a lot of people in a big country like India. Heading over to the questions again, there was a mention from John Laban who says cities only exist. The part of your presentation where you say it's not about technology, cities, and he says cities only exist because of technology developed by Homo sapiens. That's also the point you make, of course, during this question on the COVID crisis. There was also a question on sustainability included in smart city planning, but that's also something you already mentioned. Yeah, there's a question from Koen. India is a country with a big income difference. Inclusion is about including also people with less resources. This is already challenging in the Netherlands. What do you think we can learn from India regarding to inclusion and bridging income differences?
Well, one, I think, is the approach that we have towards our engagement with citizens is very inclusive in nature. So I'm not sure how much we'll be able to solve their problems, but we at least have an inclusive way of listening to their problems to begin with. And so you're very, you're aware of what's happening. The second is within the smart cities, there's a big push on employability, on skilling, on getting the right. For example, a lot of cities are spending on getting optical fiber connectivity, broadband connectivity, even into the low-income households, so that people can start businesses and people can start to link up to the global economy right from their households. A lot of investment going into, as I said, into education for the low-income society, health access. I've been reiterating that fact that one of the prime areas of concern which we are targeting is in health access. these are the areas, but easier said than done. It's a race. The more you do, the more you need to do, and the more people are there in the system for whom you need to do. Resources are always a crunch, in a crunch. So um, mm, that's how it is. In fact, most of our programs, whether you see Government of India investment in urban areas, as well as state government investment in urban areas, is mostly going into creating inclusive infrastructure.
But will that also change? Will that also change the face of India? And because you're living together with a billion people, that's quite a crowd. Do you think this technology revolution will really change India? Will India be different in, let's say, 20, 30 years?
India will be very different in 20, 30 years. Absolutely very different. Technology will have a very, very important.
That's interesting. It's interesting to follow. There's a question from Mr. Shah. Can decentralized waste management solve the current waste management problem in India?
Yes and no. It's all dependent on the context of which place you talk about. There could be cities which would do very well with centralized systems. There could be cities which would do very well with decentralized systems. And therefore, I say that let's not go in with a solution in mind. And there have been cities which have done well in both, and who have failed in both. So it's an evolve. I think yes, decentralized waste management is definitely something that has worked in many areas. But let's go with an open mind, see what's needed for the context, and we figure out what's best for that.
Okay. Okay, thank you. And another question from Guus Derks. Is there a policy about using open source, open standards, or open data in India? Is that something which is important to you and which you are working on?
Absolutely. Before the mission, we had 3 of these 100 cities sharing data on the open data portal. Now all the 100 do share that. All the 100 are now working. As I said, we're actively working on creating an open source data exchange for the country. We have, in fact, during the times of the COVID crisis, also been very open in our cities with sharing data with people. As I said, we're trying to build organizational capacity, work on people, augment capacity as well as build capacity of people who are already there on dealing with data and technology, build private public alliances around data. So huge amount of effort is going into creating systems which are very open on data, and by the way, a big work on standardization, as you said rightly. So standards, open platforms, open data exchanges, open data portals, all of them are very, very important component of our strategy.
And are these only technical standards, or are you also trying to build more standards on, for example, how you face problems, or how you do urban planning, or how you do social planning, or?
So I think the standards mostly that we are coming out with now are interface standards, largely which will be digital standards, and some standards will be, for example, on standards of mobility systems, bus designs, footpath designs, water design, and all that. But largely, the how elements that you're talking about are left alone, and we think we're in the phase of the journey that the how elements should not really be standardized at the moment, because a body of practice just needs to happen and develop, which is very contextual to our country before we go on standardizing that. Whereas the material standard, it's too early. I think if we standardize now, we will actually end up blocking innovation. Whereas the materials and the standards and interface standards between data systems and all, those are ripe for standardization, and which is where we are targeted the most. And I think going forward, as we see commonalities, we could look at practice informing standards and vice versa, and that's becoming a virtuous cycle going forward. But at the moment, I think we're not looking at standardizing the hows purposefully, so that our body of practice does evolve. That seems to be the case.
Thank you. We're heading towards 10 o'clock in this part of the world, so we 1 hour busy during this presentation. There are some more questions. Do you have some more time to answer those questions, or do you have something else to do?
No, I can be here for another 10 minutes or so.
Okay, then we can do that. I think for other people, it can be time to go to another Zoom or WebEx or Teams meeting. So this is the official part in which I would like to thank you for this inspiring presentation, and thank all the participants for being with us. And for now, this was the 5th online mission we were doing. As the Future City Foundation together with the Netherlands Enterprise Agency, and I hope there will be more online missions so we can fly together to other parts of the world. I'm heading back to the questions, and there is a question from Max, and he says he mentioned that you mentioned innovation as specifically as a foundation principle. And he says, doesn't the use of technology to make cities smart assume that the use of innovation anyway? Is there tech without innovation?
I think um, we connect technology with innovation, and we think of technology as digital technology, which is not the case. I think one innovation which really changed the world was the car. It actually got us where we are today in many senses, and it was not a digital technology. I think technology is a way of doing things in the most broad way. It doesn't mean it has to be digital. It's the way you make your pen, you make your desk, you make your chair, the way you look at climate, the way you solve your different problems.
So what makes us human, right?
It's human. It's everywhere around you. It's about doing things in different ways which solve problems. I think creativity is doing things differently, but if that creativity is solving problems, that I think comes to be termed as innovation. So doing things differently to solve problems in more contextual, more circumstance, doing more from less, and impacting larger areas and populations. That's innovation in our life. So technology is one part of it. Let's understand that. And basically, innovation could be in how you govern. Innovation could be how you generate finances. Education could be how you look at planning. uh, Innovation could also mean how you use technology, but it's not only how you use technology. And therefore a body of innovation work, and that's been a problem with our country. As I said, every country is in a phase of its development process, and we've been a top down country because we were a central government driven country, then a state driven country, and now we're becoming city governments. We're seeing this flowering of city governments. I think innovation actually flowers in a society which is more autonomy, which is more flexible, which gives its community the right to question and to right to solve their own problems, right to imagine their own city in the future. So those are things which need to happen, and automatically those societies become more innovative.
Okay.
The cultural conservation. So that's the area of work. That's the kind of area of work that we are moving towards. And when I talk of innovation, it's that broad scope I talk about.
Yeah, and so do I understand it correctly that you're saying that that the government of India is also using technology to become a more, how do you say it, a community of cities, so to say, so to be more network society instead of a top-down society.
Yeah, so I'll give you an example from the world of technology. Let's say you wanted to solve the problem of how to look after the aging population in a given part of the city because their children stay away and they're living alone in their houses. So technology can solve this problem through many ways. You could have automated health systems where you can directly connect to a doctor. But the way you arrive at this solution could be through a connective participation of the community, health practitioners, and everywhere, which is again a technology driven platform where people can come together. But ultimately, the solution that is thought about came from humans who actually work together to create the solution. It's a different way of looking at the thing. So you've seen technology being used to connect people, and then those people bring out the solution, and the solution could as well be a technology solution or a non-technology solution.
Yeah.
Different parts of the life cycle.
Connected to that, John is asking or mentioning that in India there are also he says a lot of low-skilled job tasks, low-skilled labor. Isn't it a threat to the people having that low-skilled labor, or can it also be a blessing that there will become technology to make their labor better, so to say?
So, the way technology is evolving, skilling such a population to be able to stand up to the demands of the generation and the future that we are all looking at is very, very important. And that's a scary thing. We are all concerned, and as I say, there's a lot that needs to be done in skilling and building the capacity. And therefore, I keep talking about education. And it's not only about education, it's about professional education. Look, I may not be a school graduate, pass out, but I have some professional expertise I can contribute to the economy. So you having the right skills which are needed by your economy is very, very important. And therefore, what we see in India is like almost like you have a building which is a ground floor and a 10th floor, and the middle floors are missing, which is like a lot of people with bare minimum skills in the ground floor, and you have people like the Google CEO is from India. We talk about Microsoft CEO, he's an Indian. You have so many guys who are contributing to the world economy across the world. There's so many people who are doing fabulous world-class work within the country, but they're on the 10th floor. So how you get people from the ground floor to the first floor, the second floor, the third floor, fourth floor? Because technology is, by the way, working around it, and you have to actually understand how technology is actually going to shape this in the future. So it's a big challenge. How do you skill people? How do you use technology to not eliminate the need for people, but to augment their strengths? As I was saying, if my strength is to be able to go to a household and give health advice, I can say, well, it could be done directly between the house and you, and so I eliminate this person. Or I can say that I can give this person suitable technology so that when he or she goes to that household, he can use the technology to connect both of them better. So there is a job oriented, job supporting way of using technology, which builds and also gives jobs and solves your economic problems as well. So we've got to have a different approach to how we look at technology. And I think as a country, as states and cities, we will have to work proactively and to be on top of this game. As I keep saying, it's
but that's not about using technology as a tool. That's more on what you're now saying is that you use technology as a really as a game changer. That's the way. That's the hard part, right?
Look, we can keep consuming what's coming our way. We can, in some ways,
we can use the Googles, etc. You mean
define the ways we want to consume. And I think that choice is there with us, and that choice is something that governments have to use, have to use for the better of their society. And that's happened across the world. And we talk today of globalization, and there were times, in fact, when the countries who today talk about globalization were actually talking about mercantile kinds of strategies, where you were stopping imports coming in so that your infant industry. America has actually started to talk about infant industry way back as supporting infant industry. So we are all in different phases of our histories, and we have to take our own choices as to which choices do best for our country. And depending on those needs of our country, we have to make choices in trade and technology and so many different areas. And it's easier said than done. Sometimes you feel that you have no role to play. You almost look like a bystander, because technology is just such a huge wave which will come and take over everything that you've been thinking about. As John Lennon said, life is what happens to you when you're busy planning other things. Technology is really happening to us rather than we making technology happen. But the fact is that
does that also, sorry, does that also mean that at the high end of the government of India, there's also a huge discussion on how this industrial revolution is changing India?
Absolutely, a lot of discussion around it, a lot of discussion.
And is that awareness at the ministers, etc.? Is there awareness and really understanding of what's going on, to your opinion? Can you, or is it hard to say?
To some extent, there is. To some extent, it needs to happen. I can be as diplomatic. So,
I really understand, and maybe it's also hard to answer, but it's something which is around the world, of course, a big thing.
It's very difficult. It's very and you know, data is something, and technology is something which is agnostic. And in governance and politics is ideology, and it's very difficult to find a balance. And so it's always going to be something that you learn over time. But I think there's a lot of sensible discussion happening around artificial intelligence, kind of fourth industrial revolution technologies that we're seeing, and how it will impact India and how it will impact jobs, economy. And in fact, India, with the kind of skills it has in digital, can actually see this as a big opportunity coming forward. In fact, you know, you have we've hit the sweet spot. I mean, this is from 2018 to 2055 is the spot, 37-year period is when India's dependency ratio is less than 1. We have more people in the working age group than most other countries. We are investing a huge amount of money in skilling people on digital. We are creating systems for, you know, for skilling people on, you know, various kinds of different technologies. Government is creating incentives for digital companies to set shop here. Over the last few years, the number of mobile phones that India consumes, I think more than half of it now has started to get manufactured in India itself, which wasn't happening in the past. So a lot of investment, both in the hardware, software, and communication technologies is happening in the country, and a lot of skilling is happening. So there's a conscious awareness, but as I said, it's the more you do, the more you need to do, and the landscape itself is evolving so much that you need to keep abreast with what's happening across the world. So you never.
So in 30 years, India will be the smart city powerhouse in the world. That's what you're saying, right?
I'm saying the world will be a powerhouse which will have solved its problems with digital, and I hope India would have contributed to that. I don't want to create a game of one-upmanship that doesn't really look smart to me.
Sorry for that. Heading back to one more question, I think then you have to, you said 10 minutes and it's already some more. John is asking, there's a huge new global economy in repurposing of vanity-free open source ICT hardware from Facebook, Google, and other hyperscale data centers. I understand that India has regulations in place that prevents this repurposed circular economy equipment from being imported. Could you comment on this? That's his question.
Well, there are certain things which have happened in the past 1 year or so where some decisions have been taken, especially even now in the last 6 months. But as I said, this is an evolving area, and I think even with those decisions that have been taken, there's still a very open domain. A lot of investment is coming, and I think all of us realize that each country in the world is trying to figure out how to maintain privacy in data, and how do you maintain data security in the country, and some decisions around that have been taken. They're being taken across the world, but by no means does the country want to be restrictive in nature. It just does realize how much importance it is to be connected, to be able to share, to be able to be open, and to be able to, you know, create the right incentives for people and to come and set shop in the country, and to take benefit of the digital revolution that's going to happen. So no one answer, but we are conscious of what we need to do, and we very much want to do it in the best way possible.
Okay. And final question in the chat from Ulrich Ahle, director of the Fireware Foundation. And he says that I think he's somewhere in vacation or something because he has a low bandwidth using, and that's why he's using the chat. And he says the Fireware Foundation and some of its partners are actively supporting the creation of the India Urban Data Platform. This could be a topic for a follow-up webinar. And you are invited to be there, he says.
Actually, you know, Ulrich and I have been, we've met a couple of times in the past. So I'll say hi to him. And
Hi, Ulrich.
he's been very active with our urban data exchange platform. We've learned a few bits from the Fiverr experience. I think now Fiverr has also actually taken code back from us to their development. So it's been a mutual journey so far, and we've set up a big project in Bangalore around the urban data exchange in the country, and we expect it to come out a production level, industrial level deployment by end of this year. So we would be very glad to work with Ulrich, and if there's a webinar around it, and we are able to match our timings, why not?
Because we talked a lot about, and Guus also asked what we from Europe can do together with you in India, but looking the other way around, what's interesting for you and for your companies to do in Europe? Is it also, for example, on building together those data centers, or building Fiverr blocks or something completely different?
Indian companies, if you see only technology, of course, as I said, going forward and post this COVID thing that we've seen a lot of emphasis across the world on digital. So I think clearly the Indian digital companies, and India has already been instrumental in the digital services industry. So that's clearly going to show a lot of support and growth in the future. So that's one area where I think the Indian companies would be show a lot of activity. I think a lot of big infrastructure companies also maybe come in. So I wouldn't really have a broad picture of how the industries can perform outside. I can give you examples of what they can do within my smart cities and within the country here, but I clearly see a great opportunity for digital companies from India outside, and even the big infrastructure companies in the telecom and communication space, those are doing really, really well. We have a lot of e-commerce and companies coming in into full retailing, uh, uh, and a lot of company coming into consumer services, financial services, financial technologies, uh, uh, and so those are the companies we are going to do well going forward. And India is investing a lot in its startups. So maybe the biggest company that India will produce is not even born now. But, the biggest company that India would produce in 2030, the biggest Indian company of 2030 is yet to be born. Could even be that case because one of these startups in the next few years could be one of those companies. So I think it's a very, very exciting time going forward.
Yeah. The times are changing. Also, John Lennon. Is it John Lennon?
Yes.
Oh yeah, it's those days again. Yeah. Thank you so much for sharing your insights. So it's really fascinating to try to understand what's going on there, and it's also that 50% it's still does it's talking about urgency of digitization.
Absolutely, and don't take me that 50% of what India,
of course, but
50% in the cities where they're using technology. You can see the difference. You can see the difference where the technology is getting used. It's really getting.
You can try to map that as well, right?
We are doing that. We are doing that.
So yeah, those are fascinating numbers, and it's I can And do you also think that this is more world politics? But you are 1 billion people. China is also a 1 billion country. And do you see a difference in the approach? When I understand you correctly, it's in India. It's more about building the society and making and connecting everything.
India is a people-driven approach. I think China is a state-driven approach. I would stop at that, and you could, depending on what ideology you ascribe to, say this is better, that is better. But I think in the long run, the kind of democratic processes that you see in India will create the innovation in society, because society will be more open, will have more autonomy, will have more power to question, and therefore long-term innovation will actually flourish in societies which are more open, even though that journey would be slower.
Is that also because it fits to this technology is about connection, right? It is about being a network. Is it also because of that? This industrial revolution forces us to become a network and more.
Yeah, absolutely. I was reading somewhere that in 2000, year 2000, 2% of world data was digitized. Today it's 98%. So all knowledge created in the world has now become digital. You see, how people are getting connected across the world and sharing this data and information and creating solutions. It's just mind-boggling, and it's like exponential, which is why we don't call them innovative technologies. We actually call them exponential technologies because it's innovation is actually showing geometrical progression, and 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 therefore it's even more difficult to make the right choices. So we as societies would succeed if we make the right choices because technology clearly is creating exponential opportunities.
Yeah. Yeah. We had that fascinating, and we also had a fascinating webinar from the head planner of the city of Busan in South Korea, and he was telling us that they are building really a AI platform. So next level city planning is about building a digital platform which the cities are connected to, more or less. So there's another layer in it. Is it also something the government of India is thinking about, that kind of urban digital planning, so to say? I don't really know the right word.
We call it the digital twin. So you just try to, I don't know what they mentioned. A digital twin.
You can live in it. What I understood from South Korea is that they're kind of living in their digital twin. So you can see the digital twin from out your perspective, let's say, which we had the last 2,000 years, and you can step over it and live into the digital twin, and then you look the other way around more. Sorry, this kind of matrix, but
yeah, I'll have to. It seems interesting. Maybe I'll connect with them. We have friends in South Korea and figure out what's.
Yeah, of course.
This is so exciting. You hear so many different new things happening, and there's so many choices to make. So
yeah.
Thank you. I'll find out. I have no idea of what they're doing, but we would be doing something similar in the world of planning, where we try to create predictive urban planning in the future for our country. This is what I call digital twins, in the sense you mirror a virtual city onto a virtual platform, a city into a virtual platform, and try to see how different interventions will actually make a difference in the city going forward.
Yeah, there's one question I really would like to ask you in the chat. I think that's a good final question. How can we make India sexy?
It's already sexy.
Yeah, that's also the best answer. Thank you so much.
That's a non-starter as a question.
Yeah, thank you so much. Great.
Thank you, Jan. Thank you. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Bye-bye, everybody.
Thank you. Bye.
Yeah. Bye. Thank you.
So,